Welcome to the Ultimate Resource Guide for Grounded. In this video, we'll discuss many different natural resources and their locations, as well as bug farming tips for bug parts and resources, as well as other specific tips that may be pertinent to understanding best farming practices. Now, before we get started, I want to acknowledge a specific point that I know will get brought up. Yes, the number one best tip that anyone and everyone should give when it comes to resources is that the ASL Scanner can help you find nearly everything you need in the game. Not only can it help you find resource locations, but it can also help you understand how often things spawn. Now, with that being said, sometimes it's just nice to know what a specific area looks like so it's easier to locate or navigate to. And with that, let's get started. Now first, before we talk about actual resource nodes, let's talk about creature drops or bug parts. I want to talk about this first, as this will actually be something we need to fall back on later with different natural resources. So when you are looking to farm creature resources, the absolute best way to farm them is by equipping the Rascal Rogue Mutation, which you can get by finding all 7 statues hidden throughout the yard. These statues will be available to you at different stages of the game. Also, make sure you have the Dissection Expert Mutation equipped, which you can get by finding the chip located in the Brawny Bin. Then make sure you have the Sticky Fingers Trinket, which you can get from a special piece of chewed gum located in the toolbox in the upper grasslands. You will need a tier 3 bow or crossbow and bomb arrows to blow it up. This trinket can only steal 1 item per creature, but it can stack with Rascal Rogue, allowing the player to steal 2 items per creature. Lastly, whenever you're farming for a specific creature or a boss, make sure to build a stuffed version of that creature. For example, if you wanted to farm antlions, build a stuffed antlion and drop it somewhere near the sandbox so you can get the best use of its buff. You can of course place this stuffed creature at your base, but if you place it near where you plan to farm the creatures, you'll typically get the longest duration out of it. Now, if you want to go through and farm a boss like the Broodmother, you can also again drop the statue outside her lair. And this will give you the Loot Luck perk when you rub the stuffed creature. Now, with all 4 of these items, you'll get immensely more resources, sometimes up to double the resources. And the best part is that while farming resources for creatures, a lot of creatures, including bosses, also have rare trinkets that they can drop. And this will increase the percentage of these trinkets dropping for you. Now, there is one additional item you may want to wear that will further increase your luck, and that is the Lucky Hat. When wearing the Lucky Hat, be sure to upgrade it to the Sleek Path, and then it will grant you 10% additional loot drops. This will stack with all of the other methods. This is the absolute best way to farm any and all creature drops. And no, gold cards do not count as creature drops. Alright, now that we've talked about the best way to farm creatures, let's dive into farming resource nodes. When farming grass and stems, there are 2 builds that you can go for. One is the speed and efficiency build, and the other is the carrying capacity build. The best build for the speed and efficiency route is going to be using the Grassmaster Mutation, as well as all 3 pieces of the red ant armor that have been upgraded down the Sleek Path. The moment you get to level 6, you will unlock the Sleek Path, and this will give you plus 25% efficiency for chopping resources for each piece of armor. Now, when it comes to the Grassmaster Mutation, I have done some experimenting to see what counts towards the progress. You can chop grass, husky weeds, dry grass, burr weeds, and eelgrass to level up this mutation. It's important to get this mutation as early as possible because not only does it increase your chopping efficiency by 100% when at level 3, but it also gives you back 15 stamina with each harvest. Now, the reason we chose the red ant armor is because it actually gives you 2 different bonuses. One is that it gives you chopping efficiency when upgraded, and 2 is that it allows you to carry more planks or stems. Typically, you can only carry 5, then each piece of red ant armor allows you to carry up to 3 more. So with this, you can now carry 14 pieces. Then you'll also want to equip the Hauling Hero Mutation, which you can get by leveling up your coziness level at your base. Level 1 lets you carry 5 more planks, level 2, 10 more planks, and level 3, 15 more planks. At level 3, you will then be able to carry 29 total planks. Then equip the Speed Droplet Trinket that you can get by stealing items from the Aphid. It will give you a 10% movement speed buff. Then equip the Natural Explorer Mutation. Level 1 gets a 20% move speed bonus, and then 35% at level 2, and 50% at level 3. This will allow you to farm grass and stems very efficiently while also being able to navigate the yard quickly. The rest of the mutations are entirely up to you, whether you want to mix and match combat ones or simply focus on stamina regeneration. Alright, now for hauling capacity. You will want to equip the Grassmaster Mutation again, and the Hauling Hero Mutation, which gives you the ability to carry 15 more planks at level 3. Then you also want to equip the Natural Explorer for the movement speed buff. This time, however, instead of taking the Speed Droplet Trinket, we'll be taking the Intern Badge. This badge allows you to carry 15 more planks at the cost of a 30% move speed reduction. Then you'll want to equip the Red Ant Chest Piece that is upgraded to level 6 down the Sleek Path. Then equip the Fluffy Pupa Hat. This will slightly lower your chopping efficiency because you are no longer going to be wearing the Red Ant Helmet, however it will allow you to carry 2 more planks than the Red Ant Helmet. Also, if you level this down the Sleek Path, it will lower recovery time from stamina exhaustion. Now, if the slower move speed really bothers you, then you can equip the Aphid Slippers, and between the Aphid Slippers and the Natural Explorer Mutation, you will offset the 30% movement speed loss that the intern badge gives you. If you don't mind being slightly slower, then equip the red ant knee guards and level them up to level 6 for the sleek upgrade. Then if you really wanted to max out your stats, you could stock up on worker comp smoothies, which need 1 red ant head, 1 red ant part, and 1 red ant mandible. If you use grub sludge, the buff will last for 2 minutes. If you use muscle sprouts, it will increase the healing, so don't bother. And if you use chewing gum, it will increase the buff to 4 minutes. The fact that grubs are so much easier to come by than chewing gum, I would just recommend you make a bunch of the basic versions, and you can use this as needed if you really want to max out the total planks that you can carry. Now, there is one last thing that you can do if you want to carry even more planks. You need to get yourself a baby red ant pet. This pet was recently buffed and now allows you to carry 15 more planks. So now you can carry a grand total of 64 total planks or stems on your person. But then you can also relocate a large pallet which holds a total of 60 grass planks or stems. Meaning in total, you can move around the map and haul 124 total planks or stems all at once. This should make building significantly easier. Alright, next up, let's talk about the Rock Cracker Mutation. You can level up the Rock Cracker Mutation by harvesting pebbles, quartzite, marble, clay, sap clumps, acorns, salt clusters, toenails, and charcoal. I could not get it to proc when harvesting mint, sour candy, or spicy candy, however. So it's interesting that salt worked, and I could not get those to work. Now, once you have unlocked the Rock Cracker Mutation and it comes time to farming these materials, you want to make sure the Rock Cracker Mutation is equipped so you can get that extra busting efficiency. It grants you 50% busting efficiency at level 1, 75% at level 2, and 100% at level 3. Then you'll also want to equip the Firefly Headlamp and upgrade it to level 6 for the Sleek Path. This will grant you an additional 25% harvesting speed for all these resource nodes. Now, there is one last practice you can apply to both chopping and busting builds. If you really want to go over the top, then you can make a termite delight meal and eat it. This provides both a 25% chopping harvest speed and a 25% busting harvest speed, and it will last 20 minutes. Do note, though, that this meal is quite expensive, costing 5 termite parts, 1 dust mite fuzz, and 1 tough gunk. Alright, now that we've gone through and talked about all of the different builds for harvesting, let's actually dive into the best locations for all of the major materials. First up is Acorns. There are 14 total spawn points for acorns, and 12 of them are near the oak tree, which of course is the best place to farm acorns. The best route is simply just to run around the tree and you will find all 12. Next up is berries. There's also 14 different spawn locations, however each spawn location is not actually just for one berry. Each spawn location represents a group of berries. The quickest way to farm berries in mass quantities is by shooting them down with arrows. There is a loop that you can go through and run that will net you the majority of the berries. Start at the hedge ascent and stand on top of the field research station. Shoot all the berries nearby that are relatively easy to hit. Then move over next to the juice box farther up the hedge ascent and shoot down all the berries. Then take the zip line to the bird bath and shoot down all the berries you can see from there. Now just go through and collect all of the berries in the reverse order that you shot them down. Also, as a reminder, ensure that you are not crafting berry leather at your crafting station. Ensure that you use a jerky rack to make the berry leather so you don't waste your berry chunks. Next up is burr. If you are a builder, then you will most definitely be on the lookout for this one, and I personally think it's one of the best looking building pieces we have in Grounded. First and foremost, though, you want to turn off the haze to make farming this immensely easier. Typically, you can find burr all along the trench in the haze zone. Just run along the edge of the haze and chop down as many as you can see. Typically, most of them tend to fall into the trench, so once you've run along both sides, you can hop down in the trench and carry out all the burr. You can also find some near the sandbox, and then follow that over to the picnic table area, and then finally follow it past the barbecue to the trench in the northwest of the map near the termite den. You can also find some near the brownie bin as well, and there's a few spawns near the oak tree. It is important to note that if you're struggling to find them, that there is one location on the deck in a flower pot near the mantis boss that spawns these burrs without having to plug the haze. Just get this burr and then scan it, and you can use this resource analyzer to locate large groups of it. These specific burr, however, will not respawn. Next up is charcoal. There's 9 total spawn locations, but charcoal is really easy to find because it is only located in one spot in the yard. However, knowing how to get it typically presents more of a challenge if you are not prepared. This is due to the sizzle effect draining your health quite rapidly in this area. There's a few different ways to go through and deal with this. One is by farming antlines and crafting the full antline armor set. Each armor piece applies sizzle protection, which causes the sizzle meter to fill slower. It does not reduce the actual damage that it does, however. It is important to know as well that not only do you have to deal with sizzle from walking around the barbecue, but also the ladybug larva attacks will also inflict sizzle as well. If you do have the full set of the antline armor, though, you do get a 20% damage reduction from basic attacks like the ladybug larva attacks. Then ensure you also eat 10 total mint pieces. This will unlock the Fresh Defense Mutation, which also grants resistance to both gas and burning damage, which is the sizzle damage, and the sizzle rate filament reduction. This is an extremely important step, do not skip that. If you are still struggling, then seek out the Ladybird Larva Cave. Do tread carefully though, as this place is loaded with these larvas. However, this cave can greatly help you. The reason you're actually here is to farm these larvae, as they have a 5% chance to drop an insulating larva spike trinket, which provides you with a 50% sizzle protection. It is important to know that the ladybirds in the Spicy Kultana event and the ladybirds who burrow in the barbecue cannot give you this trinket. They have to be ones that are roaming around or that you find elsewhere, as ones that are burrowed will not give you this trinket. Lastly, you can go through and eat the Queso Dill Antien, which unlocks as a recipe after you give Burgle the Black Ant Lab chip, and of course that is a meal. This also grants you additional sizzle protection. However, if you have the previous 3 items that I mentioned, you most likely will not need this at all. Next up is chewing gum. There's 11 total spawn locations, and the easiest way to get gum early is either in the haze along the bottom of the front porch, or at the picnic table. Just blow up the shovel to get easy access to the picnic table, and there can be 3 spawn locations at this point. The rest of the gum is scattered throughout the yard, and the other piece in the lower yard is in a wolf spider cave where the hamster skeleton is located. Then the rest is scattered around the upper yard, as you can see on the map here. Next up is clay. It's important to know 2 things about clay. Clay has spawn zones and not specific spawn nodes. Also, there are 2 versions of clay in Grounded. There is Tier 1 clay and Tier 2 clay. There's 24 total spawn zones in the game. You'll find Tier 2 clay in the upper yard, which is primarily found in the puddles near the giant stump. Now when it comes to Tier 1, the best place to find clay is the small island in the flooded zone. Seek out the Rash landmark, or the island in the middle of the flooded zone, and basically you'll see a giant action figure and unlock the Rash landmark. On this island, you can easily farm 150 plus pieces of clay just by farming everything on the island or in the water slightly surrounding it. And then if you were to farm the entire wetlands flooded zone, you can easily net yourself well over 500. You can also go through and find other smaller deposits of clay throughout the rest of the yard, typically anywhere where you find small puddles of water. Now, one interesting note is that on this map, it doesn't actually indicate that there's clay below the picnic table, but there's actually quite a few different nodes directly below the picnic table. Next up is crow feathers. When it comes to farming crow feathers, they can be found below wherever you see the crow lands, and when it lands, the crow will always drop a feather. However, it does not provide a large amount of crow feathers. The crow then has a chance to drop additional feathers when sitting idle on the perch, as well as during takeoff and even on the flight to its next location. The most consistent sources will always be below where it's perched, as you will know always where to look at the actual perch locations. It has 7 total perch locations. Location 1 is the branch next to the bird bath in the hedge. Number 2 is the top of the pagoda in the koi pond. Number 3 is the handle of the weed killer in the haze. Number 4 is the top of the water bottle on the picnic table. Number 5 is the top of the backyard fence above the sandbox. Number 6 is the top of the backyard fence above the castle. And number 7 is one of the 3 lasers, which is directly above where the Orbeavers spawn. Now, the very best and most consistent way to find feathers is the picnic table, due to being a flat surface and being able to see them fairly easily. However, the haze is also a great location. The haze actually has pre-spawn feathers in the trenches and a specific small hole right next to where the bottom of the rake is. So these are great places to go through and constantly farm feathers without having to worry about whether the crow passed over it or not. Now, the final way is actually the newly introduced item, the Scarecrow. You will need candy corn, crow feathers, and an acorn shell to build it. The Scarecrow has a chance to spawn a crow feather every 5 in-game hours. However, one Scarecrow can only ever have 1 spawn feather active at a time. So to resolve this, you can just build yourself a giant army of Scarecrows and then let them all passively generate feathers. However, an important note is that they will only spawn in feathers during the month of October. A fun way around this, though, is you can set your console's or computer's internal clock to the month of October, and then during this period, you could generate as many feathers as you need, go through and gather and harvest them all up, then reset your clock back to normal. Next up is eelgrass. Eelgrass is found primarily in the shallower portions of the pond and in the entrances to the pond depths. It can be harvested with daggers when below water, but a fun little tip with eelgrass is that you could actually hit the top of some of the eelgrass from above the water with an axe, meaning technically you don't need a dagger to farm it when you first start the game. Next up is flower petals. Flower petals can actually spawn in one of 2 ways. You either passively have them fall on the ground at certain plants like the roses, or you can climb up the host of plants and chop them down. You will basically find all of these different spawn locations near the pond. Next up is fungal growth. There is 2 ways to harvest fungal growth. You can get it from resource nodes, or you can get it from defeating infected creatures. Harvesting fungal growth is great, as it will help you look for the fungal trinket as well. However, it is faster to harvest infected creatures with the creature build we mentioned at the start of the video. Next up is LiliPad wax. This one is pretty straightforward. It's found on the underside of lilipads throughout the koi pond. It can spawn beneath pretty much all lilipads, but the flowering lilipads will typically provide a bigger yield. It can also be obtained as a rare drop from tadpoles. Next up is lint. Lint is located only in the upper yard. You'll primarily find it on the deck on top of the black mat, or in the undershed. However, it is loaded with loot, and you can typically get as much lint as you will ever need all in one run in the undershed. Next up is mussel sprouts. They are found in the pond lab and in some chests in the black ant lab. However, only the ones that are found in the pond lab will actually respawn. So if you choose to go back to the lab, you can go through and reharvest them. However, they take 5 in-game days to respawn. You can also go through and plant them back at your base in a garden patch and regrow them yourself. Next up is mushrooms. When looking for mushrooms, you can harvest them in 2 different ways. You can either grow them or go out and look for them. Growing mushrooms is pretty painfully slow, but if you can set up a nice little mushroom farm near your base, then while you are out farming other mushrooms or resources, you can have a nice supply on hand when you get back. This will also consistently attract weevils to hang out at your base, which is nice for a steady supply of food. Also, when growing mushrooms, be sure to focus on the red and white mushrooms as they produce more mushroom chunks than the brown mushrooms. Now, when looking to harvest them out in the wild, they're pretty much all over the map. A few notable locations are north of the sandbox and below the picnic table, as well as underneath the porch for the house, which is right next to where the wolf spider is sleeping. You can also find a bunch of them near the pond, near the drawing machine. Also, there's a ton of them just lying on the ground in the undershed. Next up is pebbles. This is one of the most common resources in the backyard. However, the best location to farm a lot of pebbles all at once is located just north of the sandbox, as well as underneath the picnic table. Next up is pine cones. There is 10 total spawns for pine cones, and they are fairly straightforward to find, as they're really only located in one zone. They are found surrounding the giant stump in the top right section of the upper yard. The best path to go through and run is just to stick to the edge of the map and run from the wheelbarrow to the corner of the yard, then run until you get to the end of the ladder. This will help you locate and clear out most of the pinecone spawns. And here is the spawn locations for them. Next up is pollen from dandelions. Just chop down all the fully bloomed dandelions. The ones with the white tufts will drop the dandelion tufts, but the ones with the yellow will drop pollen. Next up is pond moss, which can only be found in the upper yard. It's mostly located near the base of the castle, however you can also find some near the stump around the water areas. Lastly, there is also some in the undershed. And you can get some as a rare drop from the spiny water fleas. Next up is PopCaps or gunpowder, and there are 11 total spawns. The best location to go through and to find this is actually directly behind the fertilizer bag near where the shield green bug spawns. You can also find it near the berry bushes above near where the castle is located, and then at the castle itself. The easiest area to gather would be the deck, since you have a ton of mosquitoes at the castle, and then once you plug the haze, there will be an infected wolf spider at the berry bush location. So all you really have to worry about is taking out that green shield bug, and then you can get yourself a ton of gunpowder. Next up is Pupa, which also spawns in zones. You can find Pupa primarily underneath the deck of the shed, as well as in the undershed. And the same tip for berries, make sure not to craft this at the crafting bench. Be sure to make pupa leather with the jerky rack. Next up is rotten food. The best place to find rotten food is going to be the garbage pile located south of the sandbox. You'll typically find over half a dozen spawns here every couple of days, and you can also get as a rare drop from the meaty gnats in this same location. Next up is rust. There are a couple of small deposits you can find in the lower yard. However, you'll primarily find it near the toolbox and near the wheelbarrow in the upper yard. Rust is typically fairly easy to farm, as long as you can survive the area, as there are all sorts of nasty creatures near the toolbox. Next up is sap. You can find sap in small little globs all over the map on branches. Also, there are a few large sap clusters on the map. However, the best way to farm sap is passively through the use of sap collectors. Now, based on my findings, here are all the places you can place sap collectors. Starting in the lower yard, there is a giant tree bench that has fallen over that is close to the front porch. Then there is the oak tree, and then there are all the different branches near the oak tree. And then there's also a branch out in the water near the pagoda that you can put a sap collector on. And then in the upper yard, you can place sap collectors on all different stump pieces near the stump. You can also place them on the branches that are directly above the entrance to the undershed. And then lastly, there is a small white pipe in the upper yard that has a few roots coming out of it where you can place sap collectors. Next up is splinters. They also have spawn zones and not just nodes. You can find a few in the lower yard near where you found the giant stump for the sap. Just look for the log that is elevated and has a wolf spider den directly below. You can also go through and find some at the picnic table, and the prime area that you can find them is the termite den or the wood pile. Next up are sunken bones and koi scales. Koi scales and bones are fairly straightforward to get, and they're located in the same location. The only real concern that you'll have is dealing with a couple of diving bell spiders, the koi fish, as well as managing your oxygen. Your best bet will go through and find the trench at the bottom of the pond just past the T-Rex toy, and it'll provide you with both koi scales and bones. Typically, it would be advised to upgrade your diving gear when farming these in large quantities to make this a much quicker process, as well as unlocking the mutation. Diving gear will help with both oxygen and swim speed, and the mutation adds on to that. This will save you a ton of time for having to constantly stop farming to gather more air. Next up is ToeNails. These are quite a rare spawn and only have a few nodes spread across the yard. The most common place to find them is on the deck for the shed. You'll need to make your way up the table and then find them inside the dirty ash tray. The rest of them are located as follows. There are 2 in the Black Widow den on the left side of the rock pile near the castle. There is one in the exposed pipe guarded by a black ox beetle in the lower west section of the upper grasslands. And then there is one on the tip of the fallen part of the stump and one on top of the stump as well. Next up is web fiber. You can get this in one of two ways. You can either break down all the webs and web sacks and this will give you web fiber, or you can kill spiders. Early on, just go to the hedge and break every single web sack. This may trigger an early orb weaver raid, but you can typically net yourself around 100 by clearing out the hedge. Now if you do go through and use the build that we talked about at the beginning of the video when fighting spiders, especially when fighting black widows and black widow spiderlings, you will get tons of web fiber. Typically one black widow fight can yield you around 100 or 200 web fiber if you use the build we mentioned at the start of this video. And typically you want to go through and stock up with this as often as possible, especially if you're planning on building massive zip lines across the yard. Alright, now the last resources are all upgrade resources. The best place to gather upgrade materials for your weapons and your armor, also known as quartz and marble, will be largely dependent on how far you are into the game. You'll find plenty of tier 1 or small nodes spread across the map and can easily locate those using the ASL terminal or simply by just exploring. Now a great place early on that has quite a few upgrade rocks is the Red Ant Hill. Then another place would be located in the Haze. While this is quite the jump in difficulty, the Haze is a great stockpile of resource rocks throughout its trenches, and typically you'll find quite a few tier 1 and tier 2 nodes. Lastly, you can find some fairly easy level 3 upgrade materials in the Sandbox in the Antlion dens. You can also find quite a few upgrade rocks in the Ladybug Larva den that we mentioned earlier. And then lastly, the mother lode of all tiers of all resources for upgrading materials is the Fire Ant Hill. This will easily be the best location in the game to farm resource rocks. Now when it comes to farming candies, the best place for salt is the Sandbox. You can find quite a bit of it located in a couple of the different antlion nests. This is the same place I mentioned earlier for the tier 3 upgrade materials. You can also dig up quite a bit of treasure here in the Sandbox, and this is a great way for getting mints, spicy candy, and salt. Now speaking of mints and spicy cha-chas, you can look in the blue bucket in the Sandbox to see if anything is spawned in there. Typically you'll find one of the 2 items in there. You can also find spicy candy spawning in place of some of the food in the Sandbox. Also, there will almost always be a guaranteed spawn for spicy candy in the trash heap. And you can also find a spicy box in the upper yard by the tarp area. Now when it comes to mints, you can find the mint container early on near the Mathroom scale from the beginning of the game. These mints in the mint box will not respawn. Then another one in the far back corner of the map above the termite den behind the tarp. You can also find some mints in the styrofoam cup in the upper yard located on the deck. And lastly, like I mentioned earlier on, you can dig them up as treasure in the Sandbox. The mints are actually fairly common spawns when digging up the treasure, which you will need a tier 2 shovel to do so. Now, sour candy is typically the most difficult to consistently get. You can find a few sour candies in the giant pink car in the upper backyards and the seats. These do respawn. Next up, if it's your first time, then head over to the wormhole rockets scattered throughout the upper yard. I believe there is 3 in total. The easiest one to find is located right next to the giant trash bag in the upper yard, just on the corner of where the deck of the shed is located. It's important to know though that these ones in the containers do not respawn. You can also find a respawnable sour candy on the table near the giant scabby, then at the tilted over flower pot as well, just to the right of the wormhole rocket near the shed. You can also find some guaranteed sour candy spawns in the brawny bin once you've gained access to that area. Another great callout is near the white pipe in the furthest northeast part of the map. This spawn, however, rotates between mint, spicy, and sour candy spawns. Alright, well that was quite the lengthy guide. If you did stick around till the end, I do appreciate you, and if you enjoyed the video or found it helpful, then please consider leaving a like and subscribing to see more grounded content in the future.